The work of CCVO takes place on the land of the peoples from Treaties 6, 7, and 8. Today I'm on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 peoples, the Blackfoot from Kainai, Blood, Siksika, and Pagan, the Sarsi from Tsuut'ina and Eden Valley, and the Stoney Nakoda people from Morley. This land is also home to people of the Métis Nation of Alberta. Whether we are Indigenous or settlers, residents or visitors on this land, we are all treaty people. Welcome to the CCVO Capacity Building Webinar Series. I'm Tracy Braun, Manager of Programs here at CCVO. This series is focused on topics that will help nonprofit professionals and the organizations they work with build their capacity and strengthen their impact. Thanks to our sponsors, Land Solutions and Altitude Communications, for their support of the CCVO webinar series. If you're watching this webinar live, we encourage you to post your questions in the question box. You can find that on the right of the screen. If you're having technical difficulties, you can also post that there and we can see and give you a hand. For today's webinar on mental health in the workplace, I'm pleased to introduce Brandy Payne. Brandy is a former Associate Minister of Health in Alberta, responsible for mental health and substance abuse. She's a certified CMHA psychological health and safety advisor. And she works with leadership teams to build mental health at work so employees are engaged, productive, and come to work ready to do amazing things. She helps organizations develop a workplace mental health strategies that are unique to their specific workplaces. Thanks for joining us today, Brandy.
Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here and to join all of you today. Sorry, my slides. You know how it goes with these things. You have the best intentions for your slides to work all the time, and sometimes they give you trouble. So excited to join you all here today. Just to tell you a little bit about what I do. I work with organizations across sectors and of all types to work on ways that they can support their team to be more resilient, more productive, and functioning at their best selves. So up on the screen, we've got a bit of information about two of my signature programs to help organizations build out mental health at work plans. And then I also do trainings and workshops like this one. So today we're going to talk about moving from barely surviving to thriving. And I want to make a really important note that these are difficult times. They were difficult times before coronavirus hit, and it has just been exacerbating so many of the challenges that we've been facing. So the strategies and tips that we're going to talk about today are things that are going to be part of your ongoing process of moving from barely surviving to thriving. I really wish that I could just give you a magic bullet that's going to solve all of your problems overnight, but that doesn't exist. So today, instead, we're going to talk about some of the strategies that you're going to use to get there over time. Today, we're going to talk about mental health at work and how mental health expands beyond just specific instances of mental illness or issues like bullying and harassment, but speaks more broadly about how we interact with one another and the way that we're able to show up at work and do our jobs. We're then going to move into some of the strategies on three of the issues that tend to be really top of mind for a lot of people these days, but that also can have a huge impact on your own mental health at work as well as that of your team. So we're going to talk about our ability to, do our work and to balance the work and the work that we have in front of us, as well as our personal lives. So why does mental health at work matter? Well, when we're talking about it, we're not just talking, again, like illnesses such as depression or anxiety or issues such as bullying and harassment. Those are important, but we are looking at the broader scheme of mental health and how people are able to show up. It impacts how they're able to do their jobs, whether they're able to focus, the concerns around mental bandwidth and workload and being able to complete the tasks in front of us. But it also has an impact on direct costs for organizations, looking at things around sick time, medical leaves, and the like. It also talks about our workplace culture and how we sometimes wind up with that workplace culture disconnect of, we've got our idea of how we want our organization to be and the relationships that are a part of it. But then sometimes we end up with something that looks a lot different than that. So I call that the workplace culture disconnect. And by thinking about mental health at work and how we can support mental health at work, we're able to address some of that disconnect. Now, I think we can agree for most of us that the impact is something that we've been feeling lately, but I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about some numbers that we've seen in surveys. So the Workplace Safety and Prevention Services survey that was completed at the end of 2019 noted that 2 in 3 organizations say that mental health is a top emerging health and safety concern, but that only 1 in 5 organizations has a plan. It also found that mental health claims are the fastest growing claim for disability. And this was all pre-pandemic. Given the statistics we're seeing, such as the one from the Conference Board of Canada and the Mental Health Commission of Canada, showing that 84% of Canadians are finding their mental health is worse than before, I think we're going to see even greater numbers for those first two and even higher challenges for organizations, especially as we move through our second wave. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit too about 2 of the ways that mental health challenges can show up for us in our workplaces. And one of them is burnout and the other is overwhelm, which are very quite closely linked and connected to one another. So based on a study that came out earlier this month from Robert Half, which is a staffing agency here in Calgary, 33% of workers are reporting they're more burnt out than this time last year, and 49% are saying that they're just as burnt out. So that's actually quite a large number when you put those together of people who are struggling with burnout. And of those, one of the top reasons for feeling burnt out was workload. So that's why, the conversation we're going to be having around workload management is so important. It's also something that's showing up in the concerns that employers and leaders are having about staff retention and keeping their team functioning at their best. So today we're going to focus on 3 particular areas, but there's actually 13 factors that have been found to impact mental health at work. This is based on the work of the National Standard of Canada for Psychological Health and Safety, and in the workplace, pardon me. So psychological health and mental health are often interchangeable terms, but basically speak to your ability to do the work and function normally in your day-to-day life. So the standard was published in 2013. It was a joint effort between the Mental Health Commission of Canada, Standards Canada, and the BNQ, which is the Quebec version of the Canadian Standards Association. So they found that these 13 factors apply across all sectors and across organizations. Today we're going to focus on 2 of the factors and a third item, which is navigating changes, which draws in a few of the factors. Sometimes when I talk about there being 13 factors, people get a little terrified because they think that maybe they have to pay attention to all of them at once. And I'm here to assure you that you do not have to look at all 13 at once, but that taking the time to look at, 1, 2, maybe 3 at a time can have a huge impact on your team's work as well as your individual work. So today, focusing specifically on these 3 items, we're going to talk about the workload and how we manage it, balance, so that sense of harmony between our personal life and our work life. Note that I did not say 50-50, and because I think that's something that we sometimes, when we think about balance, we assume that it has to be an even balance, and it really doesn't. And that for many of us, there'll be different phases where sometimes work takes on more of a role or personal life takes on more of a role. And having that sense that there's harmony between the 2 and it works for you is really important. Then we're going to talk about how we're going to navigate change. Change is inevitable in our workplaces, and 2020 has really taught us that we can't expect what comes next. And we need some skills to be able to navigate those as we come across them. So moving on to speaking specifically about workload. The first thing, and it may seem counterintuitive when we're talking about working, is to make sure you're taking your breaks. It's one of those things that the productivity research has really shown that taking breaks throughout your work day, whether it's just a 5-minute break or even just a couple of minutes, to give your brain that little bit of a break and a little bit of time to rest can really do a lot to reset bandwidth and improve our focus. It has been found that our brains can't focus for more than an hour at a time. Now, if you're on the call and you're thinking, no, I can totally focus for 4 hours. I can just hammer through a work day without a single break. It's totally fine. I invite you to pause for a moment and think about the last time that you did that. And I want you to think about all of the times that during that day you got distracted by a ping in your email, or you were in the middle working, and then you got distracted by a thought, which you then went to chase down. Maybe you open up an internet browser, and before you know it, an hour had passed, or hopefully not quite that long. But those are examples of our brains taking breaks for us. So when our brain starts to wander, it's a good time to take a little bit of a pause. One of the tricks that I like to do is to be drinking water throughout the day, because then your body will help trigger breaks for you. Depending how much water you're drinking, might even happen every hour. The secret to this one though, and I know we don't like to talk about it, but a lot of us do it. Make sure you remember to leave your cell phone at your desk instead of taking it with you into the washroom. When we're taking a break, we want to really clear our brain from all things work related so that we can get that refocus and recharge. If you can, include a bit of self-care, so maybe some stretching or a quick walk. If it's your thing, maybe do some jumping jacks. I don't know. We all have our own things that we like to do, but doing something to take a little bit of a break that can recharge your body as well as your mind will really help with your focus. The other important piece here too is maybe have a healthy snack or something like that. Step 2 for managing workload is being realistic with our priority list. We have a habit of wildly overestimating how quick we are to completing our tasks, and we wildly underestimate how long things will take, which is cool and all, but the problem is if you assume that something's going to take you 2 hours and it turns out to take you 4, all of a sudden you're further behind, and that's going to amp up your stress level. So one of the things you can do to help improve these skills is to, sometimes just jot down how long something took you. And then also some of the time management techniques we're going to talk about in a little bit can also help you with getting that sense of how long tasks will take. You also want to look at how much time you really have. So for example, today with this webinar, we started at noon, but there was also time that I had to do before it to prepare, as well as a bit of time waiting for the call. And every meeting that we do is like this. There's a need for some buffer time. So if you have a meeting at 12 and you assume you can work up to 11:59, you're going to race into that meeting feeling a little stressed, a little behind. So you want to give yourself a little bit of extra time and then planning to stop work, but also making sure that when you're accounting for the amount of window of time that you have that day, that maybe you're giving yourselves that 15 minutes, so you only have 45 minutes to work on your task. And then doing that job kind of cross-referencing calendar and task lists, prioritizing your list, and focusing on the most important things that are going to get you closest to your goals for the week and to the goals that your organization has. Some of the time management techniques that you can use to help support you with that, looking towards and finding as much as you can to do some focused, distraction-free work. I recognize how challenging that is, especially now for people who are working remotely and maybe have family members at home, particularly children. They are great distractions. So doing what you can to, when you need to be focused on tasks, give yourself that time. So maybe this is the time, for a little bit of screen time for your children if they're kids at home, or finding a spot in your house where you can close the door, put up a sign that say, undivided attention here, do not disturb. And doing a similar thing at the office if you're in your office, feeling free to close the door or finding a quiet workspace where you can focus. Tips like the Pomodoro method can also be really helpful. So this one was invented by Francesco Cirillo, and what it is Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato, and it was based on a tomato-shaped egg timer that he used as he created the method. So what you do is you set your timer for 25 minutes, you pick one task and just work away at that task. You turn off all of your notifications on your phone, you don't answer the phone, you don't answer your email, you just focus like laser-like precision on the task in front of you. When your timer goes, you stop, you take about a 5-minute break, so maybe refilling your water bottle, quick stretch, checking what those notifications, if there's any urgent emails, is a choice you can make, or if you prefer, just blocking off the time to not check your email, and then set another 25-minute timer and repeat. After about 3 or 4 sprints of work for those 25-minute periods, you're going to take a slightly longer break, 15, 30 minutes, somewhere like that. Good time for, a snack or perhaps a quick walk. Time blocking is also a really helpful technique. So in your calendar, setting aside time for how long, or for that focused work on tasks. So for example, if you've got a big project coming up, thinking about how long that project's going to take you, and then booking out time in your calendar to work it. And in that time block, maybe using the Pomodoro technique to really help you focus. I want to talk a little bit specifically for any of the managers and supervisors who might be on the call today. So workload management is a shared responsibility and everyone has a role to play, but managers really set the tone. I know that you as a manager and probably most of your team have a laundry list of tasks to do. And the fact is that we only have so much time. So what that means is there's going to be a gap between what you want to do and what you've got time to do, which means some stuff's not getting done. And it's really important as a manager and as a leader in your organization to take some initiative and set the tone for what those things are going to be, to initiate those conversations around workload, to make sure that you and your team are on the same page for what projects are priorities and what are the things that will come later. The fact of the matter is that balls are going to drop when there's too much to do and not enough time to do it in. And as a manager, it's important for you to make sure that the balls that are getting dropped or put aside for later are the ones that you want to have put aside for later. Sometimes our team doesn't know everything that we know or have all of the information or have the same set of priorities. And so making sure that you've got that communication is really important. Part of that is going to be setting priorities and limiting the number of priorities. Originally, the word priority meant one, the top thing, but over time it's become pluralized. The challenge with that is that if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So really try and limit your team's work and each team member's priority list to no more than 3 things. So thinking about what is the top thing that's going to bring you closer to your organizational goals, and then being sure you're communicating that clearly. One of the things that I often recommend to people I work with is to set aside some time towards the end of each week. Ask your team to email you on like Friday sometime. There's 3 things that they're going to be focused on for the coming week, which then gives you time to look through it and respond back, making sure that you're on the same page and the same wavelength. This is a really good way to make sure that you're setting the priorities, but also that you're communicating them, making sure that you also include any information about deadlines and other important pieces of information. But once you've set the priorities and the deadlines, let your team have at her and do the work in their own time at their own speed. It's also important to communicate when something shifts, because sometimes that happens, right? We get to Tuesday or Wednesday rolls around and suddenly something new has come up that's more important than one of the things we were working on before. So you need to talk to your team about what's going to get put to the back burner for this week so that you can focus on the new priorities. It's also really important that we plan for shortages this year, especially. It's actually something that's always important, but the challenging thing about this fall and winter season that we're coming into is that the threshold for sick days is lower than it has ever been before, so that we can limit the spread of coronavirus. And so what that means is that folks are going to be calling in sick when normally they might have popped a Tylenol cold or just had a couple of cough drops and came in for the day. So what you want to think about is what is going to be the organizational impact when, not if, sick days happen. Is there coverage that you need to have? If you have clients coming on site or operating a shelter, things like that. How are you going to plan for that coverage and backup coverage, and maybe even backup for the backups? Beyond that, if someone is covering for someone else's workload that needs to keep that has to keep being done, how are we going to address that person's workload? So like say I'm coming in and covering for you because you're homesick. What's going to happen with the things that were on my priority list? So as a leader, we want to be thinking through these things and have as much of a plan in place as we can so that when the inevitable happens, we're ready for it. It's also important to note that sometimes folks will be able to still work even when they're home, just because maybe they've just got a tickle in their throat or a bit of a stuffed nose. In that case, what are some things that maybe they can work remotely on? Other times there'll be people who, are not well enough to work and need to just have that time to rest. So thinking about, how we can adjust their workload when they return to make sure that they're not feeling overwhelmed, and then having that have a negative impact on their stress levels and their immune system too. From here, talking about balance. So as I said before, even though I chose a balance scale, balance isn't 50-50. And it really will shift over time. So here are 4 tips that you can use no matter what your role is in your organization. The first is going to be around setting boundaries about time. So you may have heard or seen information about organizations that have done things like made rules about no emails after 6 p.m., which can be helpful, but I find often the challenge is that doesn't really reflect the need for flexible scheduling, especially what we're seeing these days. Also, what happens if you send an email after 6? These hard and fast rules, if I think, have a higher risk of people not following them, and it can just be so contradictory to be told no emails after 6, and then to get a bunch of emails from your supervisor in the evening because they're, trying to catch up on some workload. So one of the things that I've used in the past that I found incredibly successful, and I use to this day when I'm working with folks, is setting some boundaries around time and how we're going to communicate with each other after hours. So the one that I love is emails are next business day jobs. So if I send you an email, you don't have to look at it tonight. It's not for tonight. It's for you to look at the next time you're in the office. But if I need to get a hold of you, because we know that emergencies happen, we're going to do something like giving a phone call or sending a text. So something that's going to come in a different kind of alert and notification. What this means then is that your team can turn off their email notifications for their work email and get that really important break between work and home, which increases a sense of balance, but then also gives their brain a rest so that they can have better bandwidth. Now, hopefully your boss is on this call and thinks it's a great idea and is going to do it. But if they're not, this is something that you can initiate a conversation around as well. So talking to your employer about, how it's so important to make sure that you're able to really focus on work when you're there. And to that end, you'd like to try out a system where we call each other if there's something urgent, but that emails can be reserved for things that are handled during office hours. And so, initiating that conversation, frame it as a tryout thing, see how it works for a while, and then go from there. The next one I want to touch on is negotiating flexibility and being flexible where possible. This is always really important, but super important these days. We want to try and strike that sense of balance between the individual's needs and the organizational needs. There are absolutely organizational needs that have to be met, but sometimes the things that we come to expect aren't actually needs, they're just preferences. And the same too for our teams. And we've got challenges where people are doing things like balancing caregiving responsibilities, whether that's for children or elders. Maybe people are working from home or working remotely. We've got lots of work to do, so we're trying to keep it to the workday so that we can be rested and focusing our best. So trying to think of how you can navigate all of those different pieces, both as an organization and as an individual. We want to think about this like a two-way street. So for example, if I work for an organization and I need to have a little bit of time off in the middle of the day to attend to something related to my children or another family member, I'm going to have that conversation, and there's going to be a trade-off that's part of it, right? I'm going to talk about how maybe I'll make up the time another time during the week, or maybe pick up some extra hours that evening, things like that. We also want to talk about, as an organizational standpoint, if you've got folks working later hours, you want to be able to maybe offer some extra time off. We also want to think about flexible scheduling as much as we can. And part of the reason that this is all really important is beyond lowering people's stress levels in the moment so that they feel like they're being well taken care of. It's also something that really helps to build that sense of engagement in the team, as well as being part of a team that really cares about you, which can build a lot of empathy and loyalty. I think if we all think back to our favorite bosses we've had, it's the ones that have cared about us as people and recognized that we had lives outside of work. And ultimately, no one wants to be the person who's causing the disruption or making it really awkward for others. And so recognizing that when these things come up, people are doing their best. I touched on taking breaks in the earlier section. I just want to expand a little bit on this Moving beyond taking breaks during our day to talk about the importance of rest in the evening and after work hours, as well as taking some holidays and paid time off. It's these longer rest periods that are really critical for our mental bandwidth and our ability to manage our stress and anxiety. So making sure that you're taking that time off, again, maybe setting those boundaries around time, so that you've got time off, and you don't have to wonder what's going on in your work email while you're taking, some time in the evening to, read a book or do something else that's relaxing for you. We also want to be thinking about taking our holidays. This year's a tough year for holidays because, the travel restrictions and concerns about going places that exist. But at the same time, taking some time off and having that longer break for work is really, really important for your mental well-being. So as much as possible, planning that out into your calendar. Another idea is taking a tech Sabbath, which is where you turn off your phone and ideally other technology for a period of time. Some people recommend a couple of hours. There are some people who do it for full days. I don't know about you, but that gives me slight heart palpitations to think about not looking at my phone for a whole day. So maybe work up to it, try an hour or two on the evening and weekends, and then building up the time on it at your tolerance, because it can be really, really nice to have that bit of break and that bit of time away from those incessant beeps. My cat Mo has come to say hello to us, so I'm just gonna scooch him out of the way. See, real life, right? The other piece is going to be around being creative and realistic. So these are hard times, and a lot of the coping strategies that we've had in the past or things we've been able to do aren't there anymore for us. So for example, hiring a sitter or sending the kids to daycare, these are things that aren't necessarily available for us. And so we really want to be thinking, especially as we are going into kind of like the long term here with coronavirus and these restrictions, and as we move into the second wave, thinking about what are your must-dos and what are your absolute essentials. And I'm not just talking about your absolute essentials of how often do I really seriously need to vacuum my house, but also thinking about what are some of your must-dos around taking care of yourself and maintaining your self-care. What do you need in terms of rest? What do you need in terms of nutrition? What do you need in terms of making sure that you're moving your body, things like that. And each of us has a very different level. For me, I need to get outside for at least 10 minutes every day. I need to do a little bit of yoga related stretches every day, just to help my body feel like it's not seizing up and I'm not having severe back pain, that kind of thing. And so each of us is different, and what it looks like for you is going to be different than what it'll look like for me. But getting to know what it is that you need, and then thinking about how you can shoehorn that in. Some days it feels like shoehorning that time in amongst our other responsibilities. But the more that we can look after ourselves and our baselines, the better. So, and also I recommend giving some thought around, now that the weather's getting colder, winter is coming, how are you going to adjust what you've been doing and what you can do to support your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being, giving yourself that time that you need. I recognize that we all have different levels of resources and different demands on our time, as well as different levels of support. So thinking through what are some of the other options you can have for support. So for example, can you cohort with a family that is in a similar situation as yours, where you can then, trade off some responsibilities around childcare and get some extra time so that you can do the things that you need to do? Or is there someone in your circle of friends or extended family who's available to help out? So thinking about what are different solutions, and remembering that we've moved into the kind of the long haul phase here with a lot of this. And so the last piece I want to talk about is navigating changes. So this year has been so full of changes, and it has really brought a lot of the challenges we've faced in the past to the forefront. We've seen challenges around COVID, we've seen struggling economy, there's been changes within the sectors we work in, particularly for folks in the not-for-profit sector. And all of this has a big impact on our mental health. It can lead to increased stress and worry, increased anxiety, as well as some challenging mental health patterns around catastrophizing. So moving from what we know to the worst case scenario, and assuming that things are going to be the worst case scenario, even when we don't have all of the information. It can also lead to challenges with rumination. So just constantly thinking about the challenges ahead or what the impact of the changes will be in a way that is disruptive and makes it so that it is hard to do the work that you've got in front of you. So I put together 5 kind of recommendations that apply for folks in leadership roles, as well as generally within the organization. One of the most important ones, particularly for folks in a leadership role, is to talk early and talk often. The rumor mill is guaranteed going to be worse than whatever it is you have to say. And so it's really important to make sure that you're talking to your team about what's going on. Even if the answer is, this is happening, we're still working out a plan, we don't really know what it means, what are some of your concerns, what are some of your questions? That gives people an opportunity to share what they're thinking about, while also giving you a chance to hear about some things that you can maybe incorporate into the planning process. Want to be open to conversations and to approach the conversation with your team with a sense of empathy and respect, and that you care about the impact of people. It's really helpful as we're navigating changes to assume that everyone in the organization has the organization's best interests at heart and want things to be successful. And so as much as possible, as you're moving through changes, trying to keep in the forefront of your mind that sense of a generous interpretation of what people are thinking and trying to share. And then also make sure that you're able to, as much as possible, reflect that in your tone of voice when you're talking to people. So, thinking about the words that we use and the way that we chat with one another can make a real impact on how someone receives the conversations that we have. And that's a really great way to convey the care that we have. As we're talking about feedback, it's really important not to just say, I'm open to your feedback, but also to offer questions or ask people questions like, do you have any concerns about this? Or do you want to maybe take some time to think about this and we'll make a time to chat some more. Also opening the door for feedback that might be challenging feedback by saying something along the lines of, can you help me identify any challenges that we haven't seen yet on this? Or what do you think might be some ways where this won't work out or where this will cause new problems? Part of what that does is it assures people that it's okay to talk and raise concerns that they might have, but it also invites them into the process and brings a little bit more of a sense of ownership to the changes that are happening. It also helps to give you that opportunity to see from every seat in the organization what's happening and what the impacts might be. Also important to set the expectations. You might not be able to address every concern that comes up, but the more that you can listen to concerns and at least try and answer the questions that have come up or say, listen, we heard your concern about this. This is, we're going to try this. We're not able to fully address it, but here are some of the ways that we're working on it. Can be really helpful for building that team relationship and helping support people's mental well-being. It's also helpful to be really explicit about both the changes and the expectations around the changes. Being as clear as possible, using plain language, and sometimes sending emails out afterwards to summarize the conversation can be a really helpful way of making sure that people are on the same page and that the information is understood. When we're in times of stress, our ability to process thoughts drops a lot. Complex thoughts are out of the question, and we tend to be pretty forgetful. So the more that we can write stuff down, the better. You might also want to consider accountability agreements, which, for those who are newer to them, is really just writing down who's going to do what and by when and what each person's role is going to be. And so letting folks know, for example, I'm going to collect feedback from the team until next Tuesday. I will summarize the notes and send them out for everyone to review to make sure I captured your concerns accurately by end of day Thursday. I expect feedback back by Friday, and then I will talk to management about it on Monday, things like that, just to let people know what the expectations are. Also, leading into the conversation around teamwork, we want to, again, assume everyone's on the same page and aiming for that generous interpretation of people's motives and thinking about the spirit of growth and building together. One of my favorite things from Brene Brown is she talks about, instead of facing challenges and changes as like you against me or disagreements, instead we want to think about it as you and me against the problem. So as we're navigating changes at work, aiming to build that teamwork and that shared sense of value between all of us in the workplace as we tackle the challenges ahead of us is a really important way of moving through this. And then, so important for all of us as we move through changes, but really throughout all of this conversation, is around self-care and really working on your self-care strategies. So sometimes when we hear the word self-care, we automatically think things like, bubble baths, manicures, gentle relaxation massages. I don't, these lovely bits of pampering, and those are all lovely and they're wonderful, but they're not actually what I mean when I say self-care. Self-care at the root of it is about doing the things that we need to support our mental health, so how our brains are working, our emotional health, so how our feelings are, as well as supporting our physical selves and our spiritual selves. That means something a little bit different for each one of us, and what we need to be supported and healthy in each of these is going to look a little bit different based on our own unique personalities. But for example, we all need to be making sure that we're getting the adequate amount of sleep. Each of us, that's going to be a little bit different, but we all need to feel rested. It's so much easier to manage anything when you're rested. We want to be making sure we're drinking water, eating healthful food, moving our bodies in a way that feels good for us. These all support our mental health and help us to navigate some of these changes and challenges in the workplace. We also want to be thinking about our spiritual well-being. So for some of us, for part of a religious community, there's a really obvious outlet for that. Granted, it looks a little bit different now, but making sure that you're still connecting with your sense of a higher power and what that looks like. For other folks, that might look like, things like meditation. Maybe it's, things like, praying, anything that helps you connect with the spiritual aspect of yourself and your version of a higher power is really important to be doing and to keep doing that. So many of these factors of self-care are the ones that we kind of throw out the window in stressful times, and it's really important to keep them, but maybe shift them in a way so that we can fit them in the amount of time that we have. I touched on some of the physical pieces as well. And then when we're looking at our mental and emotional health, really important pieces are, if you require medication for your mental well-being, make sure you take your medication. Make sure you're getting your rest. Make sure that you're seeking the supports that you need. And maybe those look like, a professional mental health support, or maybe it looks like calling your best friend or your mom or an aunt or someone who's in your life that matters to you, that cares for you, and having those conversations about how you're doing. Social supports and social connections are found to be among the most important things we can do for our mental well-being. And so building those connections and making sure we take the time to talk to folks who matter to us and to build those social connections is really important. It looks different right now, right? And if you've spent your day on Zoom, you're not going to really want to have a video chat, but maybe a phone call. It's the hearing of the voice that can really make a difference. And maybe you do a socially distanced visit as well, keeping physically distanced by that 6 feet. Or, choosing who's in your cohort so that you've got that time with people where you can be a little bit closer and have those closer interactions, following, of course, at all times, any of the health rules. It's so important to keep that self-care piece and make sure that you're well supported, because when you feel those 4 pieces of your body or your being are connected and supported, it's going to help make all of this other stuff easier. It's going to make navigating changes easier. It's going to be making finding that balance easier. It's going to make workload management easier. So I can't say enough, prioritize your self-care. So moving to our takeaways from today, one is that we all have a role to play. And I think that that's really, if you learn nothing else today, we all have a role to play. It's really important. We want to be looking at communication and making sure that we're clear, using simple language as much as possible, and then being realistic about our workload and about our personal and professional obligations. From there, being explicit about expectations and boundaries, and especially given that people are maxed out for their bandwidth, put it in writing whenever you can. And then last takeaway is around our self-care, our time off, and our breaks. My friends, these are not optional, nice to have things. These are foundational. So the more that you can prioritize that and find even just little windows, little snippets, 5, 10, 15 minutes here and there through the day makes a huge difference. And then even just like little snippets of time throughout your day, in your time off and over your weekend, things like that, really important to maintaining your well-being. So that is it for me, and I guess we can move on to the Q&As.
That we can. I'm just coming back. Here I am. Thanks, Brandy. That was excellent. I feel like that last little bit was especially talking to me because I saw a poll yesterday that was talking about, so working from home and being able to do dishes in your break, a positive or a negative? So I'm going to think that you're maybe on that negative side, that that's not actually a break, but.
So that's
yeah,
that's a fun one, actually. That's a fun question for me because I do it too. Only for me, it's laundry. Laundry is my house chore that I'm responsible for. And I would say, like, I think you have to be deliberative about it. And so if that's the only break you can take today because your day is that crammed, putting down your work, leaving your phone, and then running over and doing your dishes, perfect. Like it's shutting off your brain from work, and it's giving that opportunity for your brain to reset. So that's good. But maybe try not to do that for every break that you take today. And so, maybe do that on one of your breaks, and then maybe on another one, pick up a Sudoku or just doodle on a piece of paper, or step outside and maybe put a hat on today. But taking a little bit of time outside or something like that to give yourself that chance to recharge. If we can include a little bit of some of our self-care practice in our breaks, that also just, it's an efficient use of our to-do list. So maybe you're going to do some squats or heel lifts while you're doing your dishes. Not the worst choice.
I'm happy to report that at least one person just noted that they listened to this webinar while doing the dishes. So, there we are. Multitasking, it's a win.
I love it. I love it.
So, I know. And that is a reminder that you can start to populate our question box. Feel free to drop your questions in there, and we're going to share them with Brandy. We've got a few minutes to do that. I'm going to start with, though, so again, I was listening to this, and I think it's really important to start this conversation in your organization. But I also am mindful that if I'm feeling overwhelmed, I know everyone else in my organization is feeling overwhelmed, and I don't want to come to the conversation with this feeling like I'm just going to be treated as sort of the whiner or the person who isn't really being a team player. But the reality is that we're all overwhelmed. And so how do we start that conversation in a way that's positive and that can actually get some traction and movement, rather than feeling like you're the person who's just, noting what everyone else is feeling, but nobody wants to talk about?
I'm so glad you asked that. I think that is such an important piece to consider. And that's why when we talk about mental health at work, most people don't come forward. A lot of people don't want to talk about how they're feeling or how they're doing, because they don't want it to impact how they're viewed in the organization or how they're seen in the organization. There also tends to be, depending, on your workplace, and I'm just going to level with you, every workplace I've been at, it's been this thing. I don't know if there's actually any that aren't like this. But, ultimately, you want to be doing your best job, and there's a sense that, everyone's going to work really, really hard. And it can sometimes feel like if you're struggling, that maybe the problem's you. And I'm just going to tell you, everyone here on the call, you are not the problem. If you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed out or burned out or like dealing with some other mental health challenges, this is nothing about how good you are at your job or your ability to do your job. What it points to is that there's something that's off in the way that your job is existing for you. So it might be that maybe it's just you who's got too long of the to-do list, and maybe if you talk to your manager, you could like work out a way to have less things on your to-do list. But I'm also going to guess that's probably not going to solve the problem, and that you might get like one or two things off. And part of it is that we all just have so much to do and only so much time to do it in. And so that's where those conversations of focusing on prioritizing work and making sure that you're on the same page and just saying like, listen, these are tough times and I'm finding that I need a little more support in making sure that my priorities are matching the organizational priorities. So can we talk about which of these things is going to be the top one or two that I'm focused on this week? Great. And can we, so like having, approaching it from the conversation from, you know, a workload and a problem solving, and like, this is the challenge. Here's an idea for a solution. Can we talk about this? When we think about things like, you know, juggling personal and personal and family obligations with work obligations, particularly for those who are working from home, but I mean, really, it shows up for everyone. You know, having that conversation of like, listen, I'm finding this hour of time or this block of time is harder. It's, you know, I can't be on Zoom from 9 till 5, for example. It fries my brain. And this is literally me, but I think many of us. And then so having, you know, this is what I need, and I need some time off, or not time off, but like some focus time to work on the tasks ahead of me and to focus on the workload. Can we try flexible scheduling for a bit just to see, because I'm finding sometimes with the way the meetings are, I'm trying to do, you know, tasks that require a lot of creativity and brain power at a time when I'm just at a natural lull. So, you know, having that conversation of where can we find some movement, what needs to get done at which times, and then what can become not optional as in we don't do it, but optional as in like, maybe we do that at, you know, maybe that team one-to-one that we've always had at 10 o'clock on Tuesday because we were always in the same building. Maybe we move that to a different time. Maybe we have it over the lunch hour and we can eat our lunch and just chit chat with one another. Or maybe we do a phone call so that, you know, you can take the call on while doing a walk, you know, maybe a lower pace walk, but, you know, like maybe even just pacing around your office to get a little bit of movement in while you're doing it. And so thinking about what some of the roots of the problem are and some of the ways that you can adjust small things or maybe some of the bigger things. And then approaching the conversation from a point of view of not so much of like, oh my God, I can't handle this. It's so hard. Unless you have that relationship with your employer, a lot of us don't. But instead say, hey, listen, I think this would really help my productivity and my ability to help our organization succeed. Here are some ideas I have.
Excellent, thanks. I'm seeing a few people ask similar questions about how do you talk to your manager, or how do you talk to someone that you work with who is really like high functioning, very dedicated, you know, that sort of go, and you want to work with them, but you also maybe can't work at that level all the time, or aren't sure you want to work at that level on all projects. What kind of strategies would you suggest for having conversations around that? And it's not necessarily your manager, it might be your coworkers as well. So
yeah, that's a great one. You know, so I post on LinkedIn pretty regularly. In today's post, I was talking about trying to run a marathon at a sprint pace. And so this question is perfectly timely because I think some of us do that, where we are just trying to like go and get things done quick, and constantly do that. But our brains aren't actually wired for that. And each of us is going to like peter out on that at a different point. But all of us are eventually going to hit a wall if that's the way we do it. So having those conversations, how to have those conversations is tricky. And I think like, so it's going to be a different approach for everyone. And a piece of it's going to be around what the role of that person who's that, like, you know, the Energizer bunny at work, what's their role in relation to you? So, you know, if it's someone who's in a supervisory role to you and is your manager and you're reporting to them, it might be a bit of a different approach to the conversation than if it's a colleague. The other thing is that we all do work at different paces and our output all looks different. And so if it's a colleague who's doing it and they're just like, you know, zipping around everywhere, maybe it doesn't really matter whether they're doing that. Where you want to focus in that situation is on communicating with your supervisor and the people you're working and reporting to about the priorities that you're working on and the projects you're working on. The other thing too is that sometimes people seem really busy, but they're not actually getting a lot done. So there's that phrase, don't compare your insides to someone else's outsides. So especially if it's a colleague, trying not to worry too much about what they're doing and really just focusing on your own work. If it's someone who's in your supervisory role to you and they're also like, oh, and I need to do this and then this and this and this and this and this and this, and then you're just like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do any of this. That's a different story. And that's where we want to bring that conversation back to prioritizing and workload, where we want to say, listen, here's, you know, the projects list that I have, looking at my calendar, looking at the meetings that we've got scheduled this week. I'm not going to be able to get all of this done. Which ones are the top priority for this week? And phrasing it, I find, in like this week as opposed to top priorities ever helps to get past some of that fear that if we don't do it now, we're never going to do it. And there's also, you know, you can also think about not just weekly priorities, but also like what falls into monthly, quarterly, annual priorities. If you're in a leadership role, you really want to be thinking about that for the organization more broadly and how the things that, you know, the tasks that people are doing on a daily and weekly basis need to be the ones that are supporting the monthly, quarterly, and annual goals. If they're just kind of over here and doing another thing that's kind of fun and neat, but not actually meeting the organizational goals, maybe that project gets delayed until there's time or until it becomes something that supports an organizational priority, right? And so that's where that role of priority setting and making those decisions is really important. Not every leader knows how to do this or is good at this or does this. And that's where, again, having that conversation around this is what's on my to-do list. I only have, I want to make sure that I'm meeting your expectations. Can we work through where my focus needs to be over the next couple of days or this week?
Cool. Thanks. So there's been a lot of challenges in the idea of working from home, and there's like two big ones. The first one is you're now working, living, spending your free time in the same space, and that is a challenge for people. And it's a different challenge than working from home pre-pandemic. Some people were working from home, but now they're doing everything within a space. So that's a challenge. And then on top of that, you're also dealing with the people in your household. So you might have children, you might have a partner, you might have roommates. And so there's different needs and different, yeah, a cat. Well, I'm surprised you didn't show us the cat. I'm a little disappointed.
I couldn't see the screen. I thought he was, because he was like on my lap.
No, I couldn't see him. So I was like, you know, I have a rule that we need to see cats and kids on all videos. That's just my rule. But so there's some challenges here, right? It's like, we're trying to do all of this in one space with a bunch of people that we weren't necessarily doing this with before. And I include people who have kids who have suddenly moved back home or, you know, are taking care of other people. So, you know, there's a mental health strategy to deal with the work piece, but then there's all of this on top of that, and you're trying to deal with your work piece. Do you have any good suggestions for folks, or even just how to sort of stretch some space so that they can feel like they're taking a break?
I love this question. I mean, and the other piece that I would add to it is that, like, so many of the things we used to do, we can't do. Like, I don't know about you, but one of my coping strategies is going out for dinner with my friends. And I don't really feel safe doing that right now. I mean, your mileage may vary, but that's where I am. And so there's things that we used to do to, you know, help support our mental health and to get that space from our family members that we don't have. I learned over the period of, you know, when we were all quarantining at home and school and daycare were canceled, that my family does best if we don't see each other for a few hours during the day. And that was not our reality. And so finding ways to navigate that can be really hard. And the challenge too is that like a lot of the advice that we sometimes hear is like, have a door that closes. Not everyone's house is designed for that, you know, and not everyone has the opportunity to say like, okay, fam, I'm going to go do work. You all leave me alone. And so finding what works for you can be really tricky, but it's important to know that we all have a different level. So for some of us, it might just be as simple as some noise canceling headphones and some screen time for the littles. Or maybe it's that you've got a separate, you know, part of your house that you can go to. Maybe you're just kind of like, it's not the best advice from a sleep standpoint, but maybe you do go and use your bedroom for work from time to time, because it's got a door that can close and you can be on your own and focused in there. And so that can be helpful. There's also looking at some of the other options as things are at different levels of being open. Maybe you can go to the library for a little bit and get some quiet time there. And, you know, maybe you're doing quiet work time, or maybe you're just sitting and looking at a magazine. That is good too, right? Like, don't be afraid of that. And taking time, you know, for a walk or something like that. If you're the only caregiver for young children or someone who, like an elder who needs ongoing support and supervision, that becomes complicated, because then you also have to like have some respite care or someone who's going to come look after them for you. So maybe that's where you start thinking about cohorting with families of that have children of similar ages, so that you can do play dates and trade off that way. Or maybe that's where you look at, you know, other respite care options for elders. Maybe there's someone that you can bring in for a little bit of time who's going to wear a mask, things like that, so that you can get those breaks that you need. Each of us also is a little bit different for what we need. And so, especially in times like this, when it's harder to do the things, like there's just more logistics involved, is really identifying what it is that you as a person need. And it's a bit of a trial and error. Like it took me 6 months to figure out that I need to do at least 20 minutes of yoga 3 days a week, which shouldn't be that hard, but it took a while to figure it out. And so having that like bit of an approach of a scientist. So like thinking about what's something that moves your body that you really like. What's something that when you do it, you feel really relaxed and restored. For me, that's reading a book. Maybe for you it's watching TV or knitting, or you know, any other hobby that you have. What's a hobby that you love that you don't feel like you have any time for, and how can you block off maybe not time in the day but time in a week to get that done? And you know, maybe that means that the dishes stack up a bit more. Is it really the end of the world? I don't know. For some people, it's super stressful. And so if something like is literally impacting your stress level, then absolutely deal with it. But for a lot of us, it's a minor annoyance. And so finding what works for you and what your must-haves and must-dos are, both at home and at work, is really important. And then I also think like trying to find that break between your work day and the rest of your day is really important. So even something as simple, like when we used to have our commutes, right? We'd get in the car or on transit and we'd travel. But for those of us who are working from home, we don't commute really. So maybe if you've got like something that can signal to you that your workday has started and stopped, like actually shutting down the computer, not just putting it to sleep. You know, maybe a quick walk. Maybe that's when you go get your mail at the end of the day. You just walk over, and that's your signal that the day is over. And then enforcing those rules around how to handle emails and like using phone calls for emergencies, things like that can help to create more of a firm line between work time and not work time.
Awesome, thanks. All right, well, we're bumping up to the top of the hour here, so I'm going to get you to flip screens for me. There we go. So if you're interested in getting in touch with Brandy, there's some information there. Brandy will also be doing a follow-up blog post for us. So if your question didn't get answered, you might see it there. We will make sure that information gets out. And then you want to flip me a screen again here? What have we got? Okay, so just a reminder that if you're not a CCBO member, there's a lot of benefits to being a CCBO member, not only attending webinars like this, but we have our nonprofits at 2, which we'll be announcing our November session soon. And there's all sorts of different pieces that being a CCBO member matters. So please take a look at CCBO membership at calgarycbo.com/membership, or you can connect with us at membership@calgarycbo.org. And finally, thanks to our sponsors, Land Solutions and Altitude Communications, to the CCBO team behind the scenes that help make this work, and to Brandy Payne for spending this hour with us. This has been great. And to you, the audience, for joining us. I hope this has been very helpful. From what I've seen in the comments, it definitely has been. And we look forward to connecting with you on another webinar soon. Thanks so much. Have a great one.